Hi everyone, and welcome to the new episode of Suitcase to Settlement series, Retiring Abroad, What It Will Really Cost You. My name is Beth Ward and I head up the partnerships here at Skybound Wealth Management. Now, whether you've just started your expat journey or you're approaching the finish line, today is all about your future and what it's really going to take to fund the kind of retirement you've been imagining. So we're going beyond those glossy brochures and palm trees to look at the real costs involved in retiring abroad, from lifestyle choices to long-term financial planning. It's an honest numbers-based reality check that many people put off for too long. To help unpack all of this, I'm joined by Ed Teasdale, Managing Partner and Chartered Financial Advisor here at Skybound Wealth Management. Now, he's spent years helping expats turn vague retirement hopes into clear, achievable strategies, and today he's here to share that insight with you. Welcome, Ed. Now, before we dive in, could you give us a little bit more information about who Skybound are and your role here?
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Beth, for the introduction. So Skybound Wealth Management, we are a globally licensed financial planning organization, and we provide specialist tax and investment advice to expats living around the globe. Okay, so Skybound is a group, we're licensed and regulated in every jurisdiction that we operate within, which means that for us as a business, it's very easy for us to look after our clients no matter where they sit in the world. And I think that's something which clients generally take a lot of comfort from, in the sense that they know that it doesn't matter where they sit geographically, they can continue to work with a licensed advisory no matter where they do reside. Now, my background over here, I'm a chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Securities Investments, which is one of the UK regulatory boards. I also studied private markets at, say, business school, part of the University of Oxford. And I advise clients over here, as well as other parts of the world, when it comes to how they can optimize their wealth, both what they've already accrued, what they're planning on accruing, and then also how we can optimize things from a taxation perspective. So really just understanding how the two sync together to formulate a much more comprehensive financial plan.
So Ed, if we're thinking about retirement, what does that reality look like compared to the dream, I guess?
Okay, well, I think that certainly one of the things that I've seen change over the last 15 years that I've been in the industry is that retirement has changed from being a point of your life where you take a hard stop at retirement, you then get into things like golf, gardening, and watching daytime TV. And I think one of the biggest changes towards retirement planning is that more and more people are looking to phase into retirement, and they're looking to phase into it sooner. And what that phase looks like, whether it's working 2 days a week, whether it's doing some consultancy work or some ad hoc work on the side. And really one of the most important things for us is making sure that people have the capabilities to make sure that they can replace the income or the loss of income that they got from full-time work, so that they can then phase into that next part of their lives and the next step of their journey.
So what does retirement actually cost? Can you kind of break that down for me a little bit?
Yeah, so great question. I think that the first thing that you really need to do is to understand your numbers, okay? You can't go anywhere if you don't know what the destination is, okay? So I think a really important starting point is having a bit of a brief idea as to where you think you're going to end up. Okay, I'm not expecting you to know where you're going to be in the next 40 years, but just some sort of idea, is that likely to be back in your home country? Is it going to be somewhere like Thailand? Is it going to be in Europe? Is it going to be back in the UK or the US? Because all these different places have all got different costs of living, okay? The next step is to really understand, what do those numbers really look like? What sort of lifestyle do you want in retirement? You fly in economy, you fly in business class, yeah? And it's understanding, okay, well, how much do I need so that I can then sustain the kind of lifestyle that I would like in retirement? Okay, and that's really where we help, is to help people crunch those numbers and not just look at what that's going to cost today, but also how much is that going to cost inflation adjusted in the next 20, 25, maybe even 30 years.
So for an expat that lives in the UAE, can you talk to me about some of those risks?
Yes, I think it's a great point. I think I always compare it between getting paid net and getting paid gross. Yeah, if you're coming back from, let's say, somewhere like Europe or the UK, by the time you've been paid, you've already had pension contributions, you've had social security contributions, which means whatever you're then left with from a pay packet is really yours then to pay for mortgage or pay for rent, and any other lifestyle things that you want to spend your money on. Okay, that's very, very different to being over here, yeah, where we get paid gross. Very few companies put in place things like pension plans or pension contributions for their employees. Yeah, yes, we've got private medical insurance, but it's really left down to the individual to make sure that the time that they spend living overseas, in the UAE, typically earning probably a higher salary than they're earning back home, paying very significantly less income tax than what they'd be paying back in their home jurisdictions as well. It's really down to the individual to make sure that they take that first step to put these types of provisions in place so that ultimately they can leave the UAE with more than what they arrived here with.
Yeah, and I think that's completely important to really understand that as well, and how that is different from, like you said, for instance, from the UK.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking about what are the kind of the top 3 big retirement sort of planning killers?
Yeah, so I think for me, what I would probably say is, the 3 most important things that we need to be mindful of is, number 1, cash is a depreciating asset. Yeah, cash in the bank feels nice, but the reality is that it's really only holding you back. Okay, because when you then factor in things like inflation, a pound today isn't worth a pound in 10 years' time. Okay, so it's making sure that we don't get too comfortable with just allowing our money to build up in the bank, and recognizing the fact that there is a time value of money. Yeah, not just in terms of what that money can buy, but also the opportunity lost from an investment perspective. Okay, the second biggest thing I'd probably say is, again, remembering that your house is not your retirement fund. Yeah, you see so many people, which in the US they call it house poor or home poor, and that's really where they have a huge amount of wealth tied up in something which, yes, it puts a roof over their head, but it doesn't put food on the table in the future. Okay, so it's recognizing that your house is not going to be your retirement plan. Okay, and it's not a substitute for it either. Okay, and I think the third one is probably procrastination. It's very easy to put your head in the sand and say, okay, well, I'll get around to doing this later. I'll do it later. Yeah, the amount of people that I sit down with and speak to who, they've got, perhaps legacy pensions that they had back in their home country. They're still investing into the default funds that they opened that pension scheme with, 15, 20 years ago. Okay, so it's making sure that you're not delaying the task of putting the right provisions and plans in place. Okay, so I think procrastination is probably one of, if not one of the biggest killers when it comes to long-term financial success.
Yeah, of course. So if we kind of talk now about a little bit more about the threats and those risks there, what does a proper retirement plan look like?
Okay, so again, for me, I think that a proper retirement plan is not having all your eggs in one basket. Okay, you want different sources of money, you want different pots of money to do different things. Okay, and it's not just about one asset class either. I always say that you want to have different pots of money that you can draw down from, whether that's things like property and rental income, whether it's things like, the stock market and stock market exposure via your pension fund, whether it's guaranteed income that you might have from state pension funds. But really what you want to do is you want to have a blend of assets generating you an income in the future, so that, whilst your house is getting, done up, or, you've got a tenant or you're in between tenants, you've got money in the stock market which you can then take an income from. Whilst the stock market's down because President of the US has tweeted something which the market doesn't seem to like, we've then got rental income which we can subsidize the income, so we're not taking anything out of the stock market whilst it's not an optimum price point. Okay, and then of course making sure that we've got guaranteed income, so for in scenarios of both, we've still got a pot of money which can then cover our essential living.
And what are some of the consequences if expats don't get that right?
So I think that most people will know someone, okay, who hasn't got it right. Yeah, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, most people will know someone who hasn't done the planning necessary to give themselves the kind of income in retirement. Yeah, I was speaking to a client the other day who was saying that their father has to give the mother money because she never paid into a pension. Okay, so her life is now subsidized and she's now, a burden on her child in order to help her get through retirement. Okay, and again, where you need to be really careful is that, at least in the UK, if you're working, and even if you are neglecting your pension, you've got something. Yeah, it might not be much, but you've got the state pension there as some sort of safety net. If you're planning on staying over here for the next 5, 10, 15 years, and when I came over here in 2012, I came over here with a view that I was going to be here for 1 or 2 years. Yeah, fast forward a few years, a decade, a house, dogs, wife, child, I'm still over here. So it's very easy to get swept up into that life as an expat, and before you know it, you're 15 years down the road, and you perhaps haven't optimized the money that you've earned, the time that you spent over here, to really put you in a better step financially.
So how can we help expats when they're thinking about retirement?
So I think the first thing that we can do is help someone understand the numbers. Yeah, we want to understand, okay, well, where are you today? Assets, liabilities, income, expenditure, but more importantly, where you want to be tomorrow. Okay, what does that future goal look like, and how much you're going to need in order to get there, and how do we bulletproof ourselves along that journey? But I also think it's important to remember that if you are working with a financial planner, it's not a transactional relationship. It's very different to buying a house. You buy a house, you see pictures on Instagram, you like it, or social media, you like it, you imagine yourself living in it. Very, very different to putting a financial plan in place. I've never met a client who said, I can't wait to pay into this pension pot, and I've been imagining what it's going to be like paying into it. Okay, so it's a very different journey and experience. And again, I think it's also important to remember that it is a process, it is a journey. Working with an advisor is not, taking out a financial product and, that's you set and done. Yeah, it's important that we can adapt and change things over time, as your life undoubtedly is going to adapt and change over time. What was important 5 years ago might not be important today, might not be important in the next 5 years, and that's why it's important that we continue to work together to iron out those creases as we go along.
So Ed, this has all been very insightful, but what final piece of advice could you give to those who are watching today?
I think my final piece of advice would probably be this. The longer you wait to plan your retirement, the more expensive that retirement's going to get.
That's so true. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you to those who were watching, and we'll see you next time.